This is the chapter 19 types of poetry, which there are a couple of different types of poetry that we are associated with nowadays. And let's see. The first type of poetry, well, according to a man named Stephen Dedalus, there are four different types of poetry according to him. They're lyric, epic, and dramatic. So they're poetry, but they're all different types of those. So the first type is lyric poetry, and lyric poetry is a short poem with images written in an uninflected voice, which means a voice that is both directly and personal, and it's usually in the first person point of view. So it's usually about themselves, kind of thing. And then in my finding in the chapter of it, a lyric poem relies on music, but it also conjures a series of visual emblems, images to which are emotions that adhere, which is, like we sing lyrics about how we feel about ourselves, or we're expressing our feelings about something that's going on in our life at that current time, or something like that. And then in my example in a poem is by D.H. Lawrence. In the poem Piano, he wrote, "To the old Sunday evenings at home with winter outside and hymns in the cozy parlor, tinkling the piano our God." So basically, he's talking about music as himself, as directly, and talking about he uses the piano directly for himself to write and for what he's expressing. So it's it goes both ways on that. And then our second type is the epic poetry. And epic poetry is the first. It was used widespread in Western cultures, and it's more of a long narrative, and it's more of a long narrative poems that are recited publicly. So it's not. It's kind of like for large crowds and audiences. And then what I found is my detail is the sort of poem is more public than private. It's intended to audiences and less than the groups. So it's more of like a story, like you want, like when you read a story out to a class, something like that, and it basically you're just trying to tell a story to other people. And then in my detail in a poem is the George Jordan or Lord Byron and the Bob Sathie, "You're a Poet," and basically it talks about himself. In the first line it says, "Bob Sawyer, you're a poet, poet laureate, and a representative of all the race." So he's basically just talking about this poem is himself explaining how he's a representative of the race, but he's also telling his story as well, and then doing what he just explaining what it is basically. And then our third type is the dramatic poetry, and it is the dramatic poem is which a character addresses another character or the reader in an offshoot of the epic. And it's the last third of the last categories. And then in the book I found in the case of My Last Justice by Robert Browning becomes someone altogether other than the poet Robert Browning. So creating like a character personified as somebody else. So he's using himself as a character, but he's describing himself as another person, kind of thing. And then in his poem, Robert Browning's My Last Duchess, he says, "The piece of wonder now, Freya Pandolf's hand worked busily a day, and then there she stands. Well, please will you sit and look at her? I said, Freya Pandolf by design for never read." So Freya Pandolf is basically his persona, and then while he's doing his painting stuff like that, but it's really him writing it, but he's using a different name. And then that'll be it for chapter 19.